Greetings. Today we have the Wednesday after Easter, the 15th of April, and I'd like to do a short reflection on Luke's Gospel on the road to Emmaus. I've meditated quite a bit on this because this is one of my favorite Gospels, and one of the things I've tried to do a twist and see this whole thing in a way from Jesus's point of view. Because when you think about the crucifixion and death, Jesus had been betrayed, abandoned, denied by the very people he chose to be his apostles and some of his disciples as well. And if you recall, on the road to Emmaus, you have two of his disciples walking to Emmaus, which is around 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they're kind of downcast, and they're talking among themselves about what had happened over these last 3 or 4 days and how their hopes, in a way, had been vanquished because they thought that, Jesus was going to resurrect in the sense of resurrecting Israel, and not resurrecting maybe in the sense of bodily resurrection, that somehow he was the Messiah that was promised, and that he would be the man or the person to save Israel, God's chosen one. And so Jesus kind of is walking up behind him, and we don't think he introduced himself because at first these two guys didn't even recognize him. And it's hard to say whether his resurrected body was that different, or as the gospel seems to imply, that they were just prevented from recognizing Jesus for whatever reason. And Jesus starts to quiz them because they look so sad and dejected. And they kind of say, well, you don't know what happened in these last couple of days? And Jesus kind of plays with them a little bit and then tries to connect the scriptures, the Old Testament, and also some of the things that Jesus had said during his public ministry, especially towards the end, and that these things had to happen to fulfill what the scriptures had said. At the same time, we sometimes have to understand where Jesus is coming from. Think about this, because as I just mentioned, Jesus had been denied, betrayed, abandoned, and yet when he rises, he doesn't just go back to the Father. He spends, depending on what gospel you read, a fair amount of time with his apostles and disciples. Think about that, because if it had been me, I'd say, hey, I don't want anything to do with these people. Look what they did in terms of having faith in me. Look at what they did. They gave me that sense that I was being actually abandoned by God, because the people that represented God, the people I came to save, the people I came to show how to live and to die and how to embrace what it is to be a disciple of Jesus, lost it. And yet he basically loves us so much that he comes back, represented by how he comes back to the apostles in the upper room with the doors locked and seems to go right through the doors and says, peace be with you. In this story, he's walking with these two guys to Emmaus and is starting to recount to them how these scriptures had to be fulfilled, and how he even took the time to spend a day or two with them, to eat a meal with them. And then in the breaking of the bread, they recognize him finally, and he vanishes. And one of the things I've always asked myself is, they recognize him and he vanishes just like that, bang. And maybe it's because once we recognize Jesus, we're supposed to start to see Jesus in each other. I remember Mother Teresa, I saw a tape of hers one time, and I myself can sometimes get critical of someone who basically deals with the problems but doesn't really focus on solutions. But one of the things that she said in her ministry is, every single person that I minister to, I see the face of Christ. And so I treat them as I would treat Christ. And in a way, in this time of troubles, when we feel abandoned ourselves, and we feel that our dreams and our hopes and our aspirations, at least for the immediate future, have been kind of blown up, that we need to remember that this experience has gone on through centuries, probably millennia. and that somehow we have this Christ still walking with us. And at times, maybe this is the time to read the scriptures to realize that we haven't been abandoned, that we aren't alone, that we have a certain solidarity. One of the beauties of the incarnation is the fact that Jesus felt most of the emotions that we felt, along with his mother Mary. I mean, she experienced the death not only of her husband, but the death of her son. And I can tell you, as a Jewish woman and as a Jewish mother, that had to be one of the most excruciating emotional experiences you could possibly have. And so, you know, when we go through these periods of struggle, of frustration, of disillusionment, feeling that in ways, since we can't come to the church, the worship space of the church, because we are the church, that somehow that we have a certain solidarity, that we have saints and Jesus and Mary, that when we talk to them, that they listen to us, and maybe they can't bail us out of this problem, so to speak, but in a way they can walk with us in this the same way Jesus walked with these two men. One of the interesting things is, in my days of wandering around looking for various denominations when I was struggling with the church as a youth, I got involved a little bit with Christian Science. And one of the things that fascinated me, because in the Christian Science, we sometimes think that they don't believe in medicine and doctors. Well, they do, for what it's worth. But their focus is spiritual healing. And maybe what we need to look at, since we're not getting too far yet with physical healing, is to look for spiritual healing, to try to reconcile ourselves with God, with our neighbor, and with ourselves. And that this road to Emmaus is a chance to start to maybe try not only to see Jesus's face, but also to see the face of Christ in one another. Here at St. Eugene's, if you've noticed, because we've been deprived of the Eucharist in the traditional sense, at least in the context of the Mass, we put the Blessed Sacrament in the window of the daily Mass chapel. And it's amazing how people have really tried to come to St. Eugene's, and the way it sits, it's beautiful, because whether it's the transfigured Christ or the resurrected Christ on the fresco in the daily Mass chapel, you know, the way it's situated, it almost looks like it's right in the middle of Jesus's chest in the evening with the lights on. And so often we need to focus on the fact that that figure of the transfigured or resurrected Christ could also be you and me in the future with the Eucharist, with God, Christ's body and blood as the center of our core. So as we leave you today, we just hope that we somehow get rekindled, that we feel that burn inside our souls that these two men felt as they were walking with Jesus, and asked themselves after he disappeared, weren't our hearts burning? So as a close, in the old days, I used to visit prisoners in Connaughter Prison north of Cairo, and we used to sing this little song after I'd bring the pyx and we'd receive communion, and we were surrounded by prison guards and Muslims and all things, but we'd still sing this hymn, and it was a beautiful little hymn. It actually comes from Promise Keepers, but it's just the refrain, not the whole hymn. So it goes like this. More like you, Jesus, more like you. Fill my heart with your desire and make me more like you. More like you, Jesus, more like you. Touch my lips with burning fire and make me more like you. God bless you all.